Greetings, everyone, and welcome. I'm Cindy Drozda, and I assume you can all hear me okay. Uh, it's great to have you all here with me. And let's see, we've got Paul here from Indianapolis, and and our good friend David, ready for some sanding. Oh boy, are we ever ready for sanding? Uh, Michael, good to see you. And here he is in Loveland, Colorado. More about that in a little while here. Um, Dr. Bob, really good friend who's on these streams a lot. Yeah, Roy, great to see you here. We've got people from all over the place, US, Canada, UK, and yes, I am ready. Okay, am I ready for what? That was the question. Uh, I am planning to talk about sanding today, sanding your wood turnings. So if you've got sanding questions, put them there in the chat, and we'll see if I can address them the best I can. Greg, good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, nice to have everyone here. Go ahead and put where you're from, and we'd love to see where everybody's from. And you can all chat with each other on the different various platforms here. So very good. All right. So before I get into the meat of the sanding business, I want to go over a few of the upcoming things and stuff happening around my world. And to start with, here is my world. Autumn is here. It may not be official yet, but the air feels like it's got that kind of fall feel to it. And the flowers, as you can see, are those sunflowers that always bloom in the fall, and Colorado asters. And there's a car sitting there with the back door up against the shop because I am loading today to go to the Rocky Mountain Symposium. Before I get to talking about that, this Woodturning Tool Talk Live is something that I do coming to you for free and live about every 4 weeks. So it's approximately monthly. It's on a Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. The next one is going to be October 12th. And what you can do is subscribe to my email list, and I send out a direct link to it. So I'll leave this QR code up for a while. I know QR codes, if you're watching this on your phone, you can't use it, but if you're watching on a computer or an iPad, then you can take your phone and click the QR code and go to the subscribe page, and that's pretty easy to do even on a mobile device. So yeah, well, I look forward to seeing y'all in a month here. Another thing that I do is, let's get rid of this just for a second so you can read that. I do a sharing and Q&A session also every 4 weeks. So 2 weeks from today, September 28th, I'll be doing a sharing Q&A session, and that is a live Zoom meeting. And the purpose of it really is for all of us to share with each other what we're doing and what we've made. Maybe it's a place where you can ask questions about your process or about any kind of details, ask questions of me, ask questions of the other people in the meeting. So it's really a lot of fun, and we all learn a lot, exposing each other to our knowledge and techniques. It's a great thing, really great thing. Somebody's thinking I need to get out of bed or something. My alarm just went off. I don't know what that's all about. Okay. Well, yeah, so please subscribe on my website and you'll get the Zoom link. You can also just show up for the tool talks like today on my YouTube channel or Facebook or LinkedIn or various platforms I'm streaming to. The direct link is a nice thing, a little bit easier. So I'm every 2 weeks on a Thursday, and my friend Todd Rains is every 2 weeks on Fridays. My time is Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Todd's time is Friday at 2:30 p.m. Central, and he'll tell you the story about 2:30 on Friday someday. So you can see either me or Todd at the end of the week every week. um, I am going to see Todd and Shelley actually tomorrow because we're going to the Rocky Mountain Woodturning Symposium. And that's a really fun symposium. It's local here to me. Todd and Shelley are driving out, and as vendor showcase goes, Joe Fleming will be here also. Anybody else? I'm not sure from vendor showcase, but we will be sure to do some streaming from the event at some point. Can't promise you when, but that's always fun. If you're in the area, stop into Loveland, Colorado. It'll be a great time. Michael McEwen is going to be there. He's already in Loveland. So we'll look forward to seeing Michael. And then a couple weeks after that, Vendor Showcase comes back to us. And the QR code is how you sign up for Vendor Showcase. Let me just get that. Let me perhaps put it over here. Oh, that's not going to do much good, is it? Okay, we'll just get rid of it for a bit. Vendor Showcase is live Zoom meetings where you have your live camera and mic if you want it. And the six of us, Joe Fleming, Steve Worcester, me, Todd Raines of Woodturning Tool Store, and Lyle Jameson, we get together and we're all demonstrators and tool vendors. We get together and we do a little program with demos and lots of fun. Weekend specials quite often, Q&A time, and we show you all the tools we make, and usually we make something and auction it off at the end for a charitable cause. So this is a lot of fun. I know you're going to love it. I hope you'll show up. And here is the QR code to register for Vendor Showcase. You can also go to my website, and there's a register link on my homepage for Vendor Showcase. Or if you sign up on my website for my email list, I will be sending out the registration link for Vendor Showcase probably numerous times. And our theme this time is Make It, Fall Crafts. And we're going to be showing some items that we might be wanting to make this season for holiday decorations, for gifts, various things that we've all done in the past or would like to try and do. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I'm thinking about it, and it's going to be lots of fun. So yeah, that's going to be October 7th and 8th weekend, 4 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern. I know that's a little bit late for those of y'all over there in the UK. I apologize, but we're trying to accommodate what we can, and it won't be recorded. So you got to show up. The point of this one is show up live and hang out with us. It's not about watching a show. It's about being part of it. Just like these live streams. Of course, the live stream today is recorded. So if you miss it, you can come back. And I'll get rid of that. I do a program about once a month that it's an IRD is what we call it, interactive remote demonstration. It's basically an online wood turning class where I show you in detail how to make something. I'm going to show you now what I did at the last one. I made this little box here. Let's zoom out just a bit so you can see the whole thing. I didn't make this one in the IRD. I made this one beforehand, and it's fully sanded and everything. It's got a threaded lid, which I showed you how to do in the class. And the threaded lid is made using an insert in the bowl there. This one is direct threaded on the lid, but the one in the class had an insert also on the lid. And that was a lot of fun. You can still rent that video as soon as I get it done and see how I did this. It's got thread chasing. It's got multiple parts assembled. It's got some jewelry components there, and really fun little project. So yeah, so great to see everyone here. I see you're all putting your location and things in there and saying hello to each other, and this is really, really fun. Here's Duncan from across the pond. Great to see you here. Great to have all my friends show up for these things. Yeah, I love it. Oh, in Spain. Hola. Very good to have somebody from a little further east over here. Nice. And oh yes, and you'll see how I do with sanding. I do cut the sandpaper into little pieces. Uh, yeah, and dances with aardvarks. I wonder who you really are, but I see you on here a lot, and welcome. It's great to have you. Uh, some people have code names like Spirit, Wind, Wood, Stone, and Bone. That's a good one. And sometimes I get to know who you are, really. Anyway, okay, so let's get on with things. What I'm going to do first is talk about sanding techniques for power sanding and hand sanding. Now, the way I define that is power sanding is when probably the lathe is spinning, but also the device with the sandpaper on it is spinning or moving in some way. Hand sanding is where the lathe is spinning, probably, or turning at least, and the abrasive is just held in your hand or with some kind of device that doesn't motorize. Okay, so this is such a long subject. I can't possibly cover every single detail, but I'll get a few of my favorites in here. Now, I've got a few pieces that I gathered up that I can show how to sand. So very good. And write your sanding questions in the chat or hints you have about sanding. If there's a technique that you really like to do, let everybody know about it. It's a good thing. Okay, so first thing I'd like to do is show some of the devices I'm going to be using for sanding. And I'll start with power sanding. Power sanding, I'm using a drill. And this is a cordless drill. It's not the one I always use for sanding. I'll use this if I don't have a lot of sanding to do, but I also have a drill with a cord on it over at my other lathe that I use for a lot of, if I'm in a big production mode on something. Now here's a good question. Is an inertial sander hand sanding or is it power sanding? Okay, let's talk about that. First, I wanted to just mention this drill here has in the chuck a pad, a sanding pad. Get the drill off to the side here. The sanding pad has a place to chuck on it, and this one's hex shaped, which is kind of nice. A lot of them are round, and it's got foam, and then it has either hook and loop or some kind of a surface that you can glue your sandpaper onto. What I'm using is I like hook and loop personally. So we've got our disc with the abrasive on it that's hook and looped on to our pad. These are real good ones. They're semi-stiff foam, and the foam is really good quality. It seems to last a long time. And I can chuck this into a drill. They come in different sizes. I've got a 2-inch and a 3-inch and a 1-inch. It looks like I've customized this 1-inch. Yep, I have. And that's another thing you can do with these is turn them down, cut them down, change their size, turn them into a round-ish thing. This is one I chucked it in the headstock on this round shank, and I took a gouge or a skew or something, and I turned a shape on it, and then I glued some loop or some hook Velcro on there. So, oh, here's somebody I haven't seen on these streams before. Jason, great to see you. I miss your Facebook posts. I haven't seen you on there for a while either. Maybe I'm just missing out. I don't know. But greetings. Welcome. Nice to have you here. So here's another good question. Sanding at high speed just burnishes rather than cut well. And yeah, I'll address that right now. I agree with that. I don't know if I would say just burnishes, but what I will say is, and this is according to sandpaper manufacturers as well, the abrasive will cut better if you give it some time to work. In other words, if the wood is turning really fast past the abrasive particles, they can't get a bite on the wood and they don't tend to cut very well. Not only that, but they will also, you'll build up more heat, and heat is definitely the enemy of not only wood, but sandpaper. Um, well, there's an interesting idea. And can you mount this mandrel directly in the headstock in a chuck? Yeah, sure you can. If you're going to mount it in a scroll chuck, that's what I have here. This is a scroll chuck. Gonna get a little further over with the jaws, the 4 jaws and everything, and it's screwed onto the spindle, the lathe spindle. If what you're doing is mounting this device in a drill chuck in the headstock, you need to have a thread on the end and a drawbar, a piece of threaded rod going through your spindle so that the Morse taper stays in the socket. So you really want to secure this. The Morse taper in the headstock needs to have something holding the device in. So I wasn't really going to do that today, but yes, you can definitely do that. I have done it. It works just great. So the 1/4-inch round ones, this one here being a hex-shaped shank, yeah, there's an advantage there that you can chuck them in other things that have collets. Like, for instance, the comment a bit ago was about inertia sanders. And the question being, is an inertia sander a power sanding or a hand sanding? Well, it's actually a little of each, because it doesn't move until you touch it on the wood. So I'm going to call this a hybrid. It's really kind of hand sanding, but yeah, it uses motion. Either way, it is an option. And I will show how this works. This one is made by the Sanding Glove. Yeah. And you can get them made by lots of different people. Simon Hope makes one over in the UK, and turningwood.com makes one. Here's a comment from Kurt about high-speed sanding. Yeah, it can cause enough heat to cause cracks in the wood. And especially if you live in New Zealand, all the woods over there crack like crazy from heat checking. Yeah. So it isn't even if your wood isn't completely dry. It's something about it, like it heats up the wood and it causes problems. So yeah, that's another reason not to sand at super high speed, because it can generate heat. The heat also will destroy your sandpaper as well as make your hands uncomfortable. A good thing to think about is if you're sanding and you're holding the paper in your hand and your hand is hot painfully, then slow things down. Slow the lathe down is the best one. Also, some sandpaper will load up more when you're running faster. And yeah, this is an interesting concept, Philip. Using a square piece of abrasive on the round sanding arbor means that you can use the side of it as well. And here's another thing I do. That's way too easy what you just talked about there. Wish I'd have thought of it. But here's something that I like to do quite often. Is this where we are? Let's see where I am. Okay, let's go over here, and now we'll go back over here, and there we are. I wanted to get closer there. This is approximately 1 inch, about 25 millimeter sanding arbor, and I've got a piece of sandpaper, and I'm going to put a 2-inch disc on it, and I'll make some little cuts all around the edge of the disc. And this is the same idea as what Philip was suggesting, because now when I put that on, the sandpaper can wrap up around the sides of the disc, and while it's spinning inside my form, and here's the kind of form I'd use that on, something like this. Now, when I spin the disc or spin the mandrel, the disc is doing some work up around the rim here on the inside. So hopefully I'll show you that live, but we got a lot of stuff to show here. And we got a bunch of questions. I love it. Please bring on your questions. Okay. The tip is cutting the sanding disc round allows the edge of the disc to dig into a bowl. Oh, so if you cut it as a square shape, it's less likely to dig in. And that's a good point, Ron. I'm going to say it in another way too. Always the edge of the sandpaper, whether it's a round disc or something else, has the potential to dig into the wood. So yeah, cutting it square or using a bigger disc on your smaller mandrel, that's going to give you the ability for the sandpaper not to dig in on its edge. Okay, a couple of questions, comments. I love it. A small drill chuck on one end and a turned handle on the end. Okay, yes, this is a good little device. It would be very similar to that inertia sander, except without a bearing, but you can take and use it with a sanding disc in a chuck or just by hand. And I'll show a little bit of that too. All right, so what's the highest grit that I use? That's the finest grit, 4,000. And the only time I'll use a finer grit abrasive than 4,000 is if I am polishing resin or stabilized wood. And then after the 4,000, I'll go to some polishing compound. But really, I find 4,000 to be plenty good most of the time. And okay, so where was I? I was talking about the power sanding. And also when you talk about these mandrels that we use for power sanding or for inertia sanding. Oh, and I wanted to mention something about this inertia sander. It's got a collet, so you can't put the hex shafts in it. It's got a collet and a bearing here, so it'll turn when you contact the wood. It'll spin. I'll show that in a minute here. And very good point, Steve. Sanding wood and sanding finishes are two different animals. The different kinds of abrasive one might use, as well as the different processes. And I am not going to talk about sanding finishes because, well, truth is, I typically sand the wood and then I put an oil finish on, and I barely do any abrading afterwards. So that's just me, though. It's a lot of different ways to do things. So this this pad here, and I'm going to introduce something else. I was going to introduce it later, but let's talk about it. Some of this stuff right now, because since we're talking, the Velcro hooks on these pads are notorious for wearing out. The most famous reason is the disc gets the discs loop Velcro gets worn out and it spins and the disc comes off and you don't notice it right away because you're standing on the inside of something and the Velcro is just grinding away on the part on the wood and it wears off these little hooks. So a good thing to do is to put an interference or interface pad on, and this is just, it's basically hooks and loops together, and this is for a 3-inch, and it would go on under the sandpaper. It doesn't really add much difference to the flexibility of the mandrel, but what it does is it allows you to replace this because it's going to wear out instead of the Velcro on the end of your pad. Oh, can you replace the Velcro on the end of the pad? Absolutely. I like RTV silicone for that. Clamp it overnight. And a lot of mine have been replaced. Another thing we have for these mandrels is various foam additional pads. This is a fairly stiff one. I don't use this on here. I use it on the hand sander. But if you wanted a little more flexibility, this is a softer foam, and you'd put that on, and then your sanding disc on top of that, and it just gives it a little more conformability for inside curves or funny shapes and stuff. And then this one's even softer foam for even more of the same. Personally, I don't usually use those, but I don't know, it's just me. I do use the interface pad, and sometimes I use this. This is a 1/4 inch, 6mm or so thick, fairly stiff. This is a fairly stiff foam. It's a lot like the foam on the mandrel itself. Okay, comment Duncan. If you have an old Starrett type hole saw of the same diameter as your sanding pad, you can grind the teeth away, put an edge on it, and cut your abrasive when you use to punch out. Cut the abrasive discs out. Yes, I've done that. I do that. Although these days I usually buy my discs all ready to go, but I have in the past definitely punched my own. And what I did was I took the ground the teeth off and put a Dremel type of thing in the drill press, and with that ground an edge on the punch. And I found that spinning the punch in a drill press to cut the sandpaper was not good. I had better luck pounding on it like a punch with a hammer. So that I have done that, a lot of that actually. Where do I get the hook pads? Okay, yes. Where do I get all of this stuff? Yeah. Oh, and here's another interesting comment, Pete. Thank you. A 3-inch disc on a 2-inch mandrel, but mounted off center, so you have more edge hanging off partway around the rotation than the other, and that's going to do even more to prevent the edge from digging in. Okay, well, I've only got an hour here, and I've almost used up half of it. I've got a couple of things I want to talk about. So yes, blending a resanded area without resanding the entire piece. I believe I showed that in my last online class, and I'll hopefully show that today. Oh, yay, here's Woodturning Tool Store, Todd and Shelly. Great to see you guys. I hope you're driving at the moment, because you're supposed to be in Denver later today. So very good. Although I don't hope you're driving while you watch me online. Just looking forward to seeing you guys. Absolutely. And yeah, making your own discs. It really, in a way, doesn't make sense to make your own of any of this stuff. So let me put up here a few sources for the supplies. And actually, let's get me, since I'm talking, I may as well talk. Most of the stuff I'm going to use today comes from turningwood.com. I also like some of the products from the sandingglove.com. You can find these folks online if you Google them. And I know you can't really get this off, you can't get a link off of YouTube here, but what you can do is, after it's all done, you can watch it again, pause the video, and copy down that link. And if I'm on the ball, I will go into the comments on YouTube, StreamYard, and LinkedIn and put the links in there. Or you can always send me an email. Okay, yes, send me an email anytime if there's something you want to know more about. The big moment for today is I am going to do a raffle courtesy of Steve Worcester at turningwood.com, the sandpaper guy. We're going to be giving away 2 sanding kits a sanding kit to 2 different people. And that includes a hand sander, interface pad, and 10 packs of this Galaxy abrasive I like a whole lot. in 120 through 1000. So what you got to do is, and I'll talk about some of these products a little bit also. What you got to do is type hashtag, that's a number symbol or a pound symbol, hashtag turning wood, no spaces, no capitals, into the comments on whichever platform you're watching. I didn't mean to do that. And let's see if somebody's done it yet. Somebody put in their hashtag turning wood so I can put it up and show everyone. There we go. Okay, Joe, you got it. Hashtag turning wood. That gets you in the drawing. We're going to draw close to the top of the hour. 2 people will win. And let me show you exactly what you will win. Oh, there we are. Lots of comments rising up and causing my mouse trouble. There we are. Yeah, keep it going. Enter the contest, but don't let that stop you from asking a question. All right. So what about more sanding stuff? Okay, we'll just go over that right now. And I wanted to talk about hand sanding a little bit. And this is the hand sander that's part of the sanding kit from turningwood.com and an interface pad. I like to use this rather than with an interface pad. I use it just with the 1/4-inch foam pad quite often. And you just hold this in your hand, and the only thing different between this and using a piece of sandpaper in your hand is that the little bit of foam spreads the abrasive surface out and might help you to do your shape a little better. And the abrasive that I like to use is this stuff called Galaxy. It's a Merca product. It's got ceramic abrasive in it. It lasts a long time, and it's on film, plastic film. And so it's flexible, but it's also stiff. And you can roll it and sand into a small cove. You see me do this in my demos a lot. Another type of abrasive that I like a lot is this Merca Royal, or no, Bulldog it's called. And this is on paper. It's a little thinner. That means the edges are a little thinner to get into tighter places. It's differently flexible. You can still roll it instead of crease it. If you don't like buying discs or making your own, another option is always a piece of sandpaper that you can just cut to the size you want. And when I use a piece of sandpaper like this, I'll usually fold it in thirds because it makes it a little stiffer. Hopefully I'll get to showing what about that. Oh yes, and good point here, Worth. The sandpaper from turningwood.com, that's the guy who's given us the giveaway for today. It is the grit is marked on the back. I don't think I showed that, but you see here, it stamps the grit on not the 1-inch ones, but all the other ones. So what I then do, if I've got 1-inch discs and I'm reusing them, I'll just write on the back of them. Usually the 1-inch discs don't last very long anyway, so you don't have to worry about it. Oh yeah, Greg, good point that the hand sander is easier to hold on to than a piece of sandpaper. So that's another good thing. And keeps your fingers out of the way. Oh yes, that's a good point I hadn't thought of, but absolutely, safety is always good. Okay, and got any more comments? Oh yes, have I ever used mesh sandpaper? That's the one I wanted. Yes, I have, and I have some here. And what do I think of it? I think it's great for resin, and that's what I use it for, is resin, or sometimes exotic woods. The thing about the mesh sandpaper, and here's what we're talking about here. This is Abranet. It's like you can literally see through it. It's mesh, and It comes in rolls or it comes in discs. It's got loop Velcro if you choose to use it on a pad. Because it's mesh, it doesn't tend to clog like regular sandpaper. Another thing I do is I'll cut little strips of sandpaper. And what you usually see me do is not cut strips of sandpaper, but I really like the feel of sanding with Velcro backed material. It's just a little bit of cushion there and a little bit of stiffness, and I think it works well. The best abrasive that I've found does not come in rolls of Velcro backed material. It comes already punched in a disc. So I'm buying discs, and I'll buy a 3-inch disc. And here's what I do. This is for things, little things like boxes and finials. I cut the disc in 3 pieces, and then this sharp corner is pretty useless. So I'll take these, pile them up together, and don't use your wife's quilting scissors for this job here. You'll get in big trouble. And now I have 2 different shapes. They're really pretty interchangeable of little bits of sandpaper. And of course, now I've pretty well lost, or usually pretty well lost, the grit mark on the back. So I just keep them organized, and I keep track of them a little bit, or I write it on the back, but they don't really last very long, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Well, so let's sand something. I've got a couple of things up here that I'm planning on sanding. And to start with, I'm going to show power sanding on the outside of a form and some things to do with that. We'll get this a little further over. Yep. So I've got what this piece is and how I'm mounting is kind of irrelevant. That's for another discussion. But I'm going to mount this piece on the lathe somehow so that I can show you how I sand it. And just to not get me too distracted, let's hold off on comments about what I did to mount the piece, okay? We'll talk about that another time. Foam backed sanding pads. Yeah, and you can get these foam backed sandpaper. And there are other things like micro mesh, which is foam with abrasive on it that's very flexible. Some of them are foam backed paper, so it's a really soft foam. Micro mesh pads are a stiffer foam, kind of more like this kind of foam, and they're numbered and they're grit and color coded and all that stuff. And you can get another product which I very much like. I'm really not a fan of micro mesh. To go that fine, it goes up to like 20,000 grit. To go that fine on the grit, I find compound to be faster. So this is Abralon, and it is a foam-backed mesh. It's a very fine mesh abrasive, extremely flexible. Like you can wad it up, and it comes right back. And this stuff is what I use for 1,000 to 4,000. My personal preference. Now, here's something about abrasives. They don't all do the same thing. A foam mesh like this, which is so flexible, will not level out the surface at all. If you start with coarse grit Abralon on your shape that's got some little ripples from the gouge cut, it's going to just make the ripples nice and smooth. So what I'm going to use is some kind of paper with a backing or cloth or film backing, either a piece of sandpaper like a sheet or a disc. And this, especially on something like this hand sander, will span the irregularities and smooth them out. So that's my choice, is not to use those mesh foamy things until I'm down to the really fine grit. And here's another good question I'll just give my opinion on. Um, do I sand in reverse? Everybody says you're supposed to, and what you would be doing. Let's just show some sanding. I'll talk about that, and we'll address Roy's comment here. Sanding in reverse. Oh no, this one is about using compressed air to clean the dust from the sandpaper. Yes, that does help clean the dust out of the sandpaper, but it does not make the sandpaper sharp again. So when sandpaper's unless it's really clogging, usually by the time it's clogged, I throw it away anyway. All right, we're going to start out here with a drill. We'll go out here. And I'm going to put the mandrel in the drill. This is a 2-inch mandrel. And this is going to just be to show you about power sanding, as in with a motorized drill motor spinning the abrasive itself. And we're going to start with 240. How about that? Now, what grit would I start with? And there's another subject. I could just talk forever, really, about sanding, because about which grit you start with, the best way to start sanding is to end with a good cut. And you'll find that people pick up something like 80 grit, shouldn't have needed it. If I have to use something higher grit than 120, I feel like I'm really in trouble. I'll use 180 on a production project or on a big hollow form to start with. On a small piece like this, I'll start with 240, particularly if it's power sanding. All right, so this piece here. We're going to slow it down for the sanding to maybe I don't know, 300 RPM or something like that. And okay, so back to addressing a little comment here. The turning wood, and it does not have a capital T. Remember that. It's turning wood. Hashtag turning wood, all small case. It is not just U.S. only. No, we will ship it overseas. Well, yeah, sure, we'll ship it overseas. I hope nobody's in Antarctica or someplace like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is you see that the lathe is turning normal direction. So the wood is going down this way. So what I want is I want the sandpaper to go the other way. If I have my drill is reversible. If I have the sandpaper going the same direction as the wood, I don't get much of a result. But if I have the drill go in the opposite direction, now it's as though I'm sanding past the edge. Also on this edge of the pad, I've got the wood and the sandpaper going opposite directions. On this side of the pad, they're going the same direction. So when I want to sand this bottom part here, I'm going to reverse the drill and try to get right up in here. I got to get this out of here. Get right up in here next to that shoulder. The shoulder is a tenon. And you just saw there something awkward. A power sanding device like this doesn't get right up close to something all that accurately. It's better if I were to get right up close to there. Perhaps I'll use the hand sander because it'll allow me to just get right in there, you see? So this is how I would use the hand sander for that same job. As for, and notice what I'm doing here. I've got some curvature to my piece. And when I got over here, I saw that I'm contacting this side and nothing is touching this cove. So I manipulated the hand sander, and I would do the same with the drill so that now the radius of the pad is conforming to the radius. Oh, and that wasn't too good, was it? Because it hit on something. I'd better off use the bottom of it. Yeah, now the this little void in the wood is going past the edge of the sandpaper and not tending to grab it, whereas when I went this way, the little void was tending to grab the sandpaper's edge and possibly tear it. That's one of the things that why Banksia pods are difficult. So whether I've got a hand sander, which this is a really good choice for a hand sander, or here's the inertia sander. What are we doing with this thing? Well, with this one, when the wood is turning like that, and I contact this spinning pad, it will turn the sandpaper, and because they're not just going exactly the same line, if you will, you'll get the sandpaper going past the wood. Over here, now they're going the same, so that's not as good. So with this one, I would want to either sand on this side of it, or we're going to turn the lathe in reverse. Okay, now I can, is it that way? No, now I can sand here. It always goes in reverse direction, doesn't it, pretty much? So here's the thing about the inertia sander. You touch on one side and you get sanding. You touch on the other side of the disc. Let's show it a little better. I'm touching on the edge of the disc, But if I touch the middle, right in the middle, nothing happens. I've got to go up to the out away from the middle a little bit to get it to spin. So anyway, inertia sanders do not work right in the center of a piece because the wood's not turning. And power sanding, which I like very much. Now the wood it's going in reverse. It's going this way. So I've got my drill going the other way on this side. And I usually hold it like, and then I'll reverse it. We'll do the other side. And you can get a place where it's not bouncing around. A lot of the time, what I will do is I'll brace it against my body here so that I can control the drill, and I'll try to get where the spinning of the piece, how the piece is spinning is controlling the drill. And maybe it makes sense to go on top of the form instead of underneath like I was just doing. But maybe if I had the lathe going the other way in reverse, maybe now underneath the piece works better. All right, so here's something. A natural edge like this. When I'm sanding the uninterrupted part, that's from here to the foot. Power sanding, no problem. But the natural edge is not going to do well with the lathe spinning and something rubbing past it, because it's going to round over all these little interrupted areas. Not to mention the sandpaper might get caught on these edges and tear or grab, and you want to be real careful not to be sanding with a handheld piece of sandpaper, because it can grab and bring your hand into the natural edge. So what do I do for a natural edge? Well, I have a random orbit sander. This is air powered, And I have a on here right now, I have a 1-inch disc that's a little bigger than my pad. And I'm starting with 400 after I have done a negative rake scraping cut on the surface of the wood. This is a real high RPM sander, and starting with 400 is really a good thing because if I start with any coarser grit, it just sands more than you need to and tends to round things over. So here's what I'm going to do. And I know this is loud, but I think this microphone noise cancels. It's a hypercardioid. I think this is going to be okay for you. So let's try it. I'm not going to turn the lathe on. I'm just going to sand, and I usually like to hold it. And we're just going to sand. I may start with 240, but usually I start with 400 on this. So tedious though it is, I don't do that much of it. I'm not sanding with 6 grits. I'm only sanding with a few. And I'll just go all the way around, and that sanded, closer look perhaps, that sanded the interrupted part of the natural edge. You'll notice that I'm trying not to sand across the edge. I'm just coming right up to it, making sure that at all times more than half of this pad is on the wood, and I'm not going to try to sand with the edge of the pad right on the edge. So this is what I do for natural edge. I'd like to show something else too with this thing, and that is, are we done with this piece? I think I am, except yeah, anything else I wanted to show I'll do on another piece. Got a couple more pieces here to talk about. I don't think we're going to get through all of this either. We're not, because it's already 1 hour. And I'll talk about some other things. So what I want to do here is talk about, what about this piece was turned wet and it warped a lot. Check it out. This bowl here is now narrower in this dimension than this one. So I can't really mount this on the lathe and do any sanding. And usually you will have to resand after something dries. So this I'm also going to sand, and I probably will start with coarser grit this time. I will sand with my random orbit, and I'll just hold it, and I'll probably start with 240 here, and I'll try to get right up close to this edge. Here's where, right on that edge there, is where I would like to have my disc, my sandpaper disc, exactly the size of the pad. That way, when I go to sand right up next to a corner like this, it'll get right in the corner. So that's my take on that. So what else have we got to do? I wanted to show a few little techniques for how to hold the sandpaper. And what have I got? I've got that piece there. I'm going to put a different chuck on here now. Oh, and I wanted to talk about resin as well. So that we're not going to have time for everything. Oh, and Roy, good point. Remember to talk about safety. Always remember to talk about safety. I don't talk about it nearly enough. And one of the things to be said is wear eye protection. That's no matter what you're doing out in the shop. And I am doing things when I hold the sandpaper to keep it from sucking my fingers in. Using a hand sander is something too. So I'm sorry if I don't dwell on safety enough. Please use some common sense. Think about how the wood and the paper are moving. So sanding with the lathe at slow speed, yes. I do turn the lathe down when power sanding. And the big reason for that is that if I'm power sanding, the motor on the drill is doing all the work. And so I don't really need to spin the lathe fast. I I can get basically what you're looking for is the abrasive material moving past the wood is what makes it sand. And that's like let's say you take a piece of sandpaper. If you had no lathe running, you would move it back and forth past the wood. Well, with the lathe, we're moving it past the wood by turning it. And if I'm moving it past the wood by rotating a drill, then I really don't need the piece spinning in the lathe at all. That just keeps my round shape symmetrical as I sand and keeps the sandpaper from digging in because I'm sanding at the same rate all along the piece. So what do we got here? Okay, I want to show the inside of this little form and how we're going to sand that with let's go back here. With the drill, I'm going to put in the drill this 1-inch pad with a 2-inch disc on it, 2-inch sandpaper disc, and I've got little cutouts on the edge of the disc so it'll form over. And remember what I was saying about move the sandpaper past the wood. Well, I hardly need to turn the wood at all. So I'm going to turn the lathe on just barely because all the work is being done by this drill motor. And one of the things that's happening here is that on the inside of this piece, right there in the center of the box, the wood is not spinning at all. Right in the middle of something is the wood is not moving. Just to either side of it, the wood is moving. The further out from center you get, the more movement, the more the wood itself is moving as the lathe turns. So if I were to just take a piece of sandpaper, and I'll almost never use a piece of sandpaper just flat, I'll usually at least fold it in half. If I were to use, I'm not going to do this actually because it isn't really that safe to put your finger inside there. But if I were to do that, what would happen is right in the very middle, nothing is happening. Just to either side of center, the sandpaper is moving past the wood. So I'm going to end up, if I press a piece of sandpaper right in the middle of a spinning piece, I'm going to generate a bump eventually. So that's why this moving the sandpaper past the middle, not only is it going to do the job faster, but it'll do a better job because it smooths out the surface better than holding a piece of sandpaper on there could ever do. And that's also the case with a dome shape rather than a concave like we have here. So what else have we got in here? Oh, yes. Another thing I want to do on the inside of that piece is I want to sand it without sticking my fingers in there. Maybe I want to get up under the rim here. And maybe I don't want to power sand. I do want to just put a piece of sandpaper in there. Here's what I'm going to do. I've got this, it's a hemostat. It's a medical device or other things we used to use them for. And I've got a piece of this is foam, rubber foam, somewhat soft foam, piece of sandpaper over it, clamping the hemostat. Now I have a little flexible sandpaper covered pad, and I'm going to put that in, and we're going to spin it a little faster now because this piece is not moving. This is hand sanding. This is the sandpaper is staying still and the lathe is moving. And we'll put that in there, and I'll just move it to where the sandpaper gets right up underneath that rim to sand in there. And I can adjust how I grip what kind of a piece of sandpaper to get in there wherever I want to. I can also use the hemostat for my Abralon pad and get in here. And now this is going to get up under the rim and down in the bottom there and polish with all 3 grits. So this is very good. Here's another thing. Now, this particular box is not, this opening, it was designed to take an insert for threads. But if I had a box lid recess like this, and I wanted to sand the recess, here's the technique. I will start with 1000 grit because I made the recess a very, very smooth cut with my recess finishing tool, which is a double beveled scraper. So the sandpaper, cut edges together, fold it so the edges are parallel. There's no grit on the cut edges. There is grit on the fold. If I was to put the fold down in that recess, I'm going to be sanding a groove there on the bottom of the recess where that ledge for the lid is. So I want the cut edges, and I'm going to put a little bit of bend it a little there so that it makes it stiffer, because if I just hold it like this, it's really not, doesn't have much shape to it. And what I want is I want it to sand the entire length of the recess wall the same. I don't want to just only sand out at the rim and not down in there. So I'm going to put it in the recess this way. Let's give you both of them. Oh, that didn't work too well. So I've got cut edges together and I'm sanding the recess wall this way. That'll get me a nicely sanded recess. And that was, I started with 1000 because if I started with 80 grit, I'm going to distort that nicely finished recess a whole lot. Plus it fits my lid, so I really don't want it to be made a lot bigger. So, hey, we got any comments or questions I've been missing here? Here's OB. Very good to see you here. And I don't know what that is, so maybe you can give us some enlightenment. Like the safe edge of a file, exactly. Yep, the edge of the file with no teeth on it won't cut, and that's the edge of the sandpaper isn't going to cut, and that's why I'm doing it that way. So that's for a piece like this. Now, what about getting into this corner right here? Again, if I do cut edges together, I've got something stiffer that I can put some pressure on, and I'm you can see I'm starting with only the edge contacting only down in that groove, and then I'm moving up the piece. Another thing I'm going to do on this form is I'm going to wrap the sandpaper diagonally around the convex shape, and I'm going to, actually the way I do it is, get back here, on this side, and I'm holding on to the end of the sandpaper with my other hand, putting pressure and guiding the sandpaper with this hand, so that one hand is just holding it in place and the other hand's doing the work, and I'm keeping the paper moving the whole time. Oh, good point, Thomas, about the hemostat. That's this thing here. You should hold on to it like this rather than putting your fingers in the holes. It's easier to manipulate as well, but you wouldn't want it to grab and have your fingers stuck in these holes. So that gets me diagonally around the bead. Notice the paper is at a diagonal. I'm not sanding with the edge of the paper right in line with the rotation, because what that'll often do, maybe not with 600, what it'll often do is put a groove in there. What I want is for the sandpaper to bridge the grooves, the concentric grooves. Okay, so what else were we going to talk about? Resin and some other things. Anybody have a question? We're kind of running out of time. So what is it you'd like to see? Here's something I'll get to work on. I have this is just a piece of sheet sandpaper. So I have folded it in thirds. I find with sheet sandpaper, because it doesn't have the extra oomph of the Velcro backing, folding it in half, well, that might be good to go in here, but in thirds is stiffer, and I find easier to get down into a crevice like that. And with folding it in thirds, then I have 1, 2, and 3 surfaces to use. Sometimes when I'm doing something like this, the sandpaper will get loaded up right on the very end, and I'll just snip it off and use the fresh paper. Okay, so that's that piece. Oh, I wanted to talk about the coves. That was basically sanding a small bead. This is a 2-inch, 50 millimeter or so diameter convex curve. It's a box. Here we have, this is the bottom of the finial of my, oh, and these are not the jaws I used. Well, this'll work for this here. This is for my demo piece from last weekend. So I want now to sand this cove here. And are we on? We're not. Just checking my control panel here. Okay, I could zoom in just a bit here. It might be good. And I'm going to sand. This is an OG. That means there's a cove here and a convex here and then a cove here. I've got these sharp little fillets, and I don't want to mess up the crispness here. So I'm going to start with 600, gripping the sandpaper so that the end of my finger is covered with abrasive and my thumb is holding it to the finger. We'll turn the lathe relatively slowly. I think 350 or 500. And I'm going to contact the paper on the cove. Notice how I'm holding it away from that edge. I'm contacting down in the bottom of the cove, and then I'm going to move up to the rim, up to and past the rim, but I'm not going to go on over the rim. My hands are in the way here, I realize. So up to the rim and stop, not sanding. Well, if I did want to, maybe I do want to round over this edge, but on this one, I don't. So I'm going to get my sandpaper on the wood down in the bottom of the cove and then move up to the rim. Up to the rim and past it, not letting the paper go over the edge. When I sand this little cove here, I'm going to roll the paper. That makes a little radius, and then I'll put that radius up under the cove there. If I think that wasn't enough of a radius, I'll fold it in half and then roll it. And the thing I'm trying to be real careful about here is my fingers are keeping from the sandpaper touching this corner. Because if I just put this in there and I didn't pay attention, I might sand off this corner, and I really don't want to do that. The fillets, I usually will never sand them at all. I get a really clean cut, and you can't see any tool marks on there anyway. But if I had to sand the fillet, I want to use non-Velcro paper. This actually has adhesive on it, but I don't care about that. I'm just using it as non-Velcro paper, 1000 grit. And this is a case where I'm not doubling the sandpaper because I don't want a lot of thickness down in that groove there. But I'll double the sandpaper when I go to sand this bit of a convex here right up to the groove. And maybe I want to sand this fillet. So I'm rolling the paper. That makes it stiff across this dimension here. And that way, when I touch the fillet, I'm sanding it flat instead of rounding it over. I know this is all in miniature, but when you're sanding something little like that, all those techniques make even more of a difference. Okay, what do we got next? We got a piece of resin, and I did really sort of want to talk about the resin, and we're running over time a bit, but we're going to do the drawing as soon as I do one more little thing here, and that is a drawing for a sanding kit from turningwood.com. And thank you so much, Steve, for your support of my live stream here by donating those kits. He's providing them. He's shipping them out to you. And he's a really good guy. Steve Worcester, turningwood.com. He is also a member of Vendor Showcase, so you'll see him on our Vendor Showcase thing. I guess I didn't manage my chucks all that well here. I've got another thing too that I could do, and maybe I can. I can't really do it with resin. So out little piece of resin, and it's going to go in the chuck. This is a hybrid, actually. It's burl and resin, and this end has got a little of both. So I'm planning that I will sand and polish this end here where there's some resin. And my goal is to show you what my take on finishing resin, where I'm cutting it just with regular turning tools. And is that the farthest we go? No, there we go. I'm cutting it with regular turning tools, and then sanding it with abrasive and finishing out with polishing. And I'll go through the entire steps of process. Looks like we got somebody I don't want on here. Is there any way for me to get rid of a comment? No. Well, please ignore the spam post there if you happen to be on. It looks like Twitter or Twitch. Twitch. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't be on Twitch. Is anyone listening on Twitch? Let me know if you think it's worthwhile, because when I get a spam post, it's a turnoff. So I'm going to treat this piece of resin like a piece of wood. To start with, I'm going to turn up the speed. Maybe sometimes I will turn resin at a bit slower spindle speed. And we're just going to make now a little dome shape on the end. I'm not making anything. I'm just creating a surface that we can use to demonstrate some sanding techniques. Now, if this was wood instead of resin, the treatment of this end piece would be a little different. And I'll have to make mention of. So that's just a little bit of a dome. As with wood, I'm going to slow the lathe down to maybe 500 RPM for sanding. And you'll see that if I start sanding with regular paper, it loads up. And yeah, no, it's loading up. It's plastic and it's loading up the regular sandpaper. Will this stuff be any better? No. This is where the mesh abranet is really good. And I'm going to start with, we'll start with 240. Because this stuff, it just comes right out. And if I had my air hose hooked up, I could blow out the rest of it. But that's what this abranet is so good for, is that if you have something that tends to load up the sandpaper like resin, it'll do a good job. Right on this very end here, if this was wood, remember I said if you just hold the sandpaper on there, it won't sand right in the very middle. And we might see that with the resin also. You're not really seeing it as much here with the resin as you would with a piece of wood, where a lot of the time you'll see just a little white spot where it didn't sand and didn't cut very well. So what I'll do is probably not with the 240, but when I get to the 400, and we got 400 next, sand it with 400. You'll find that often resin for sanding really does not like heat, and you're better off at a slower spindle speed. So what I'll do is shut the lathe off and sand across that middle with every grit. Yeah, a couple of people trying to enter the drawing, Mike. You have to have no capitals and no spaces. So this is what it looks like. Not this here. No capitals, no capitals. And if you enter twice like Lester did, it's too smart for you. You won't have two entries. You'll only have one. So, okay, so that was 240, and then we go to 400. I'm going to try to go through the whole process here for you, because I really want to show what it looks like. RPM that I'm using here for sanding, it looks like about 5 or 6 or 700, 400, 600. 600. Well, John Fisher, our resident comedian, has a very good point. This isn't funny. This is actually true. If you had an eccentric chuck, you keep readjusting the non-turning center point. Yeah, you could. Sounds like an awful lot of trouble to go through just instead of turning the lathe off and sanding. So that's 240, 400, 600, 1,000. Here's some 1,000. I don't have 1,000 in Abranet today, so we're going to just use this Galaxy, which does load up. Not good. I just didn't have the right stuff at hand. And now I'm doubling up on the grit because I'm going to start sanding with the Abralon with 1,000. So we've got 1,000. And it's marked on here. This is a turningwood.com trademark. He marks the grit on there. So 1,000. And here you see pretty clearly how we're not getting a very good abrasion right there in that center, maybe 1/8 of an inch. So I'll sand across there. Is wet sanding better for resin? It could be, very likely. I haven't really done as much with it as maybe I should. When I have tried wet sanding on wood, I have been somewhat unhappy with the fact that the water obscures whether you've actually got all the scratches out or not. And you kind of have to let it dry before you know whether you're ready to go on to the next grit. And so I find that I really have not embraced wet sanding. Another thing I haven't embraced is abrasive paste. That's a subject for another day, abrasive paste. That'd be something like this Yorkshire grit abrasive paste. It's got grit in a mineral oil base, and it works kind of like the compound that I'm about to use now. I am going to get it down to as a reasonable amount, and that's 4,000 grit for me before I go to the compound. And there are a couple of compounds out there that are good. There's a 6-step one called Magic Juice, and I've used that a fair bit. And here's another one that I'm finding is good. It's color tone, and I've been doing some resin jobs, resin pieces lately, and using this product with 2 steps. I think Magic Juice is claiming you don't have to sand it as fine. We'll take a little bit. I like the shine I get on this stuff. Lathe is turning sanding speed, and I'm just going to apply the compound, and then I'm going to turn up the speed to about 3,000 RPM, and maybe that's too much. If it was getting hot, I would say that would be too much. And burnish off the compound. Here's a good point that I have heard about also: wet sanding with linseed oil or some kind of other oil. And I have done that. And what I have found is it makes a giant mess. And the point that Robert is making is that you could fill the pores in the wood with the slurry, and then because linseed oil will dry, it would then harden up, kind of like paste wood filler. And I suppose that's probably a good point. I haven't really done that much. I have wet sanded with oil in the past with Abralon, and it works really great, except it kind of ruins your Abralon pad. They last a long time if you don't trash them by filling them up with oil that dries hard. And we'll just up the speed a little bit. We'll up it to about 2,000. This is a fresh piece of paper with the finer grit. So I tried to not get the the last grit involved in this grits application. Did I get a little bit of, oh no, it looks good. See, it's looking pretty shiny already. The polishing compound I'm using here today is Color Tone. I believe I got it from Craft Supplies, but it doesn't say. There are lots of polishing compounds out there, and they all kind of do a similar job. Magic Juice is a real popular one that I get a good result from. So I have now done the 2 grits, and I saw, okay, here's a good point. I don't use a tack cloth, and I really don't remove, as I probably should, the dust of the previous grit from the next sanding like I should. What I'm doing to remove the residue of these compounds is that I took the little piece of, it's gone now. I'll do it again. We'll do number 2 again. I've labeled them 1 and 2 because swirl remover or whatever. I don't know what that terminology means, but I just want to know which one I do first and which one I do second. So I'll do number 2 again so I can show you what it was I did to get rid of the residue. I'll start applying it so it doesn't sling all over the place with centrifugal force. I'm applying it at a low speed, and then I'm going to turn the speed up to 2,000 or 3,000 RPM, and this will just give it a chance to do some high-speed polishing. I'm not pressing real hard either. As I said, there are lots of them that are good. Nova's polishing compound is good. McGuire's makes one. They're automotive polishing. Okay, so here's the side I was just using. I turned it over. Now I have fresh paper, and I'm buffing out the surface, and that is my way of getting rid of the grit so that I can then start with the next grit. I actually think that second polishing with number 2 gave me a little bit of an advantage there. And next I'll put on some wax. This is a good wax. Another wax I use is the Hampshire Sheen wax. And this really doesn't do much. It just gives it a tiny bit more of a shine, as you'll see. I'm applying the wax at low speed, about the 300 to 500 RPM sanding speed type of thing. And then I'll let it sit for a little while. The wax is going to kind of dry, right, so that it makes a nice coat of wax. And then we'll up the speed to full speed and take a clean paper towel and buff out the wax. And look at that shine. It's beautiful. Yeah, so that came out really nice. And that was sanding up to 4,000 with abrasive paper and cloth, and then sanding to, and then doing polishing compound. And here's another brand of polishing compound. I haven't used it, but anything that's good for honing chisel edges is going to do what we want, probably. I try to think of what I'm trying to do here is the equivalent of buffing out a car's lacquer. So what I want is something that will give me a see-through shine with no scratches. Okay. So any more questions here? Oh, there's a joke that I don't get happening in there. So we are going to do our drawing now, folks. You've got a couple more seconds to put your entry in if you haven't already. Type turning wood, hashtag turning wood, no spaces, no capitals, and that'll enter you in the drawing. I am going to add my drawing thing, but first I want to go over again what we're giving away and by whom. Steve Worcester, turningwood.com, has very generously, nicely donated for us a sanding kit. And what we're going to get is the hand sander that I showed. It comes in a bunch of colors. This was some commemorative one that I got, and they're plastic. They come also in a couple of sizes. This is a good one for my small hands. Oh, I want to mention something else about this. Notice the hex receptacle there. You can put a hex shaft sanding pad in there, and now you have maybe you have a 3-inch on your 2-inch hand sander, and you have some more foamy flexibility to the pad. And I can also put on a foam pad. It's going to come with what he calls a interface pad. That's not what this is. This is a foam pad. The interface pad is just to protect the Velcro on your hand sander, and also spans this center hole kind of well. And you put that on. This is the wrong size for this one. And then you put your sandpaper disc on there. You could actually put, like we were talking about, you could put a big interface pad on and then a big disc, and then you have some flexibility for getting into strange places. So you're going to get a hand sander, an interface pad that fits it, and enough 10 packs of this Galaxy abrasive. That's this here. It's a ceramic, alumina ceramic on film, very long lasting, really good quality Velcro on it, and stiff enough that you can roll it and it doesn't crease like some sandpaper does. So you get 120 through 1000. So I think that's going to be 6 packs of sandpaper. And I want to mention that turningwood.com, there's his address there. I think I might even have a QR code. There we are, turningwood.com. He will do up reasonably priced sample packs for you of any of his abrasives you'd like to try out, where he'll just put one of each grit in a little bag, and really good price there. By the way, our sanding kit here today with the sander and the interface pad and 10 packs of sandpaper, it's about a $50 value. So not a bad price. Thank you so much, Steve. Steve's a good guy. And you all are good people as well. And I'm really happy to have you all here. So let's do a drawing, hey? Here's my drawing. When I click the draw button, it's going to pick a person. And then we're going to pick another person, because Steve is offering us up 2 of these sanding kits. So you got about 5 seconds or less to enter again if you haven't already. And you can't enter more than once and have more than one chance to win. This software is too smart for that. So, okay, so now I'm going to go and click. And we're going to have a winner here. A winner. Stephen Gordon. Thank you so much, Stephen, for participating. And you'll need to get a hold of me unless I'm not sure if I know your address, but you'll need to get a hold of me so I can get your contact information over to Steve. Okay? So we're gonna draw again. Stephen Gordon, our first winner of a $50 value sanding kit from turningwood.com. Thank you very much, Steve. I can't thank him enough. You know, I said, well, I'm going to do this thing on sanding, and did he have any tips for me? And I need to stock up on sandpaper. And he said, well, he'll give away some prizes for us. Very, very cool. All right, so we're going to draw again. Winner number 2. Off we go. Hey, there's Stephen Gordon on the stream. Good to see you. And please be sure to get a hold of me. And Ernest Hildebrand. Ernest, I have your contact information. I think you've won before on these things. So this is a lucky guy. Congratulations, Ernest and Stephen. So, yeah, please get a hold of me. And I'll be getting Steve your contact info and he'll send your prize off to you. It's AWGB, Steve. Oh, yes. Okay. You're the Steve I talked to a month ago or so. Very cool. Sorry, I didn't recognize the name there. Very good. Well, I guess we're sending one to the UK. That's cool. Very good. And we're going to remove that. So I'm now wrapping things up. That's a longer time than I had expected to spend. And you saw how it went. I could have talked about sanding for another hour and a half, easily enough. There were so many things I wanted to show about sanding techniques that I just really didn't get to. But thank you, everyone, for your comments and your questions and for just being here. It isn't any fun without you here. So I'll see you next time. Bye, all.